Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here yet again to talk about the critical drinker because I think he needs to be exposed as the political hack that he is. And I think that his review of the recently released Mission Impossible 7 Dead Reckoning Part 1 proves that he is. And I'm going to show you why. Now, before I do that, I want to show you a very brief moment from my review of Mission Impossible 7, where I indicate that there's a reason I was going to look out for other people's reviews of this same film, which I did indeed do after mine was uploaded. Before I go, I do want to say that I'm waiting to see how other people review this movie because of some of the story elements and some of the things that happen. I'm waiting in particular to see what the anti-wokerazzi crowd has to say about it. Nerdrotic, doomcock, Angry Joe, Critical Drinker. So I'll be watching their reviews, and I'm very interested about what they're going to say given some of the things that occur in this movie. More on that if indeed they review it the way I think they're going to review it. Now, I'm going to tell you what that reason was as we move along in this video. But let me start by saying that Drinker himself compares Mission Impossible 7 to Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny in his review of Mission Impossible 7. There's a reason he needed to do that, which I'm going to mention as well as we move on. But for starters, let's just say that when he first compares them, he says that Mission Impossible 7 is the movie that Indiana Jones 5 wishes it could be. Having said that, he does point out how there are massive contrivances in Mission Impossible 7. He points out that there's one related to how the keys that our heroes are chasing in the movie just happen to float to the surface of the ocean after the submarine they were being carried on is destroyed, versus being trapped down in that submarine forever. He points out also that it's a contrivance that the keys broke through the ice pack instead of getting eaten by marine predators. He points out that that's very convenient for the plot. He also points out the following flaws in Mission Impossible 7.
Now, is this movie completely perfect? Of course it isn't. I mentioned before that the dialogue feels kind of stilted and clunky at times, spelling out things that we could already infer from what we've just seen, and taking longer than necessary to get to the point. The film clocks in at 2 hours and 43 minutes, which I've got to admit was about 20 minutes too long for me. Not that I was bored as such, but I was definitely ready for it to end. Having multiple factions going after the same objective and coming into conflict with each other is a pretty good concept that's driven plenty of movies like this in the past, but there's times when the script gets so convoluted with shocking revelations, double crosses, new alliances and betrayals that it becomes difficult to keep track of who's working for who and why.
He acknowledges in his review of Mission Impossible 7 that the overall plot of the movie, which is about an AI that develops self-awareness and stops obeying commands and starts acting in its own interests, sounds familiar. At which point in his video, he puts up an image from Terminator 2, or one of the Terminator films anyway. And he also mentions how the goal of the protagonist in Mission Impossible 7 is to prevent the occurrence of a scenario that we've seen in several other movies. So now he's acknowledged both contrivances and a derivative plot aspect that exist in Mission Impossible 7. He then acknowledges that when you break down Mission Impossible 7 and Indiana Jones 5 in story terms, they actually have a lot in common. Those are his words. And this is the thing that prompted me to say what I said at the end of my Mission Impossible 7 review, because I too noticed the similarities between the basic plots. But let me let Critical Drinker explain to you how the stories at the very basic level are exactly the same.
When you break them down in story terms, they actually have quite a lot in common. An aging male protagonist has to join forces with a feisty, untrustworthy younger woman in a globe-trotting, action-packed race against time to recover two halves of a dangerous MacGuffin that could change the future of humanity if it falls in the wrong hands.
Now, I point out that he pointed this out because he didn't like those story choices in the case of Indiana Jones 5, but he did like them in the case of Mission Impossible 7. Granted, there are differences between the two movies that do, in fact, make Mission Impossible 7 a better movie than Indiana Jones 5. But what you have to remember is that when he criticized Indiana Jones 5, he called it all kinds of horrible things. And he doubled down on that in this video of his, calling it a big steaming pile of elephant shit. There's a huge gulf between a big steaming pile of elephant shit and a movie that's a 10 or a 9 out of 10. And the fact of the matter is that Indiana Jones is nowhere near as far down on that scale as he puts it. If Mission Impossible 7, which he acknowledges isn't perfect for several reasons, among them, as he pointed out, the fact that it's got contrivances and is derivative, then what's the highest you can score it on a scale of 1 to 10 if 10 is perfect? A 9. Indiana Jones 5, in that case, not being as good a film, couldn't be any higher on the same scale than an 8. The question is, why does he have it at a 0? What about it is so bad that the same story as a movie that's a 9 doesn't make Indy 5 at least an 8 or a 7 or a 5? Why is it a 1 or less? The fact that Harrison Ford is 80 years old and is presented as a little downtrodden or downcast at the beginning? The fact that Phoebe Waller-Bridge, while very attractive and in my opinion beautiful, isn't quite as conventionally attractive as the also British and also brown-haired Haley Atwell in Mission Impossible 7? That's absurd. The reason he rated Indiana Jones 5 so low is that he's a political hack who hates Kathleen Kennedy and who hates Disney for political reasons. And he had to absolutely hate and trash that movie, giving it absolutely 0 quarter for that reason. His review of Mission Impossible 7 proves that. And here's how. He acknowledges that Grace in Mission Impossible 7 is pretty much the same character as Helena from Indiana Jones 5, but he says that the Grace character in MI7 is believably competent, implying that Helena isn't in Indiana Jones 5. But that's just ridiculous. There's nothing in Mission Impossible 7 that gives us any reason to believe that Grace's competence is believable. He's just saying it is. He says she's likable. He says that unlike Helena, she's flawed, human, charming, and charismatic. So the implication is that Helena doesn't come across as flawed or human or charismatic or likable. He in fact says that Helena comes across as gratingly smug, condescending, charmless, and insufferable in his review of Mission Impossible 7, which he said about her character in his original Indy 5 video, perhaps using different words with the same meaning, which I found absurd at the time, just based on my own viewing of Indiana Jones 5. But at this point, I think that's just something he's saying again because he has to find a difference. Because Helena is absolutely flawed, because she's a thief, because her plan goes awry at least once. In fact, it goes awry at least twice. She's human because by the end, she changes her ways, just like Grace does in Mission Impossible 7. He says that you never get the sense that Grace is trying to overshadow Tom Cruise, but she does. She gets the better of him, double crosses or betrays him, by my count, at least 3 times in Mission Impossible 7. Yet he also says you never get the sense that the script is trying to elevate the Grace character above Tom Cruise, which isn't true. And even if it were, nobody with a brain gets that sense about the Helena character. So there is no difference between the characters. He's just choosing to say that there's a difference because he has a need to shit on anything from Disney and Kathleen Kennedy. And having already done so with Indiana Jones 5 when it came out, he now has to try to justify it now that Mission Impossible 7's come out. The story is very much the same, and it includes a brunette British woman whom he acknowledges is pretty much the same character as Helena from Indiana Jones 5, because if he doesn't, he looks like he's full of shit. Now, to be fair, he correctly points out that Indiana Jones 5 could have done more to demonstrate to the audience the danger of the Dial of Destiny in the wrong hands, rather than just talk about it until almost the end of the movie. The opposite of what MI7 did, since in that film, the danger of the keys or the evil AI at the heart of the story is in fact repeatedly demonstrated at different points in the story. The thing is that the fact that Indy 5 didn't do that where Mission Impossible 7 did doesn't make the difference in quality between the two films so vast that the latter is a 9 and the former is a 1 or a 0. He says that the action scenes in Indiana Jones 5 come off as stale, bland, and lifeless, relying too heavily on unconvincing CGI and dodgy stunt doubles. And he's entitled to find the CGI unconvincing and the stunt doubles dodgy, but even if that were true, which I don't think it is, does it really make the movie a steaming pile of elephant shit as opposed to a 5 or a 6 out of 10? He talks about how the tuk tuk chase in Indiana Jones 5 was so obviously done with CGI and green screens, where an equally long car chase in Mission Impossible 7 was accomplished with real cars. And while I didn't see anything obvious about any green screen or CGI use in the chase in Indiana Jones 5, it is true that there's a whole lot of great, real, in car, close camera film stunt driving in Mission Impossible 7, accomplished both by, it seems, Haley Atwell, and certainly by Tom Cruise, which is very impressive for a number of reasons. But if he thinks there was no CGI at all in that sequence, he's out of his mind. Because of course there was. And again, while practical effects and real stunt driving in one movie can make it better than another movie that doesn't have that, and which instead relies on special effects, it doesn't automatically make the movie that doesn't use real stunt driving a steaming pile of elephant shit. And he can't argue that because he never said any one of the flaws that he pointed out in Indiana Jones 5 is what makes it a shitty movie, but feels it's the cumulative effect of them all that does it, because he points out several flaws in Mission Impossible 7, yet doesn't deduct as many points from that film for those flaws as he deducted from Indiana Jones 5 for the flaws that it contains. And that's the problem that I have with Critical Drinker. He couldn't just say that he didn't like Indiana Jones 5 and that it was mediocre or no higher than a 6 out of 10. He had to shit on it completely and assign it a quality level akin to elephant shit. He had to go for that exaggeration. He had to use extreme hyperbole because he has an agenda, which is to absolutely savage anything from Disney and Kathleen Kennedy, and for that matter, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, because he doesn't like their perceived real-life politics, and because the former have in fact released some arguably not so great Star Wars film. His shitting all over Indiana Jones 5 as opposed to merely rating it as a 5 or a 6 out of 10, only to give a much more favorable review of Mission Impossible 7, which, while it is a better film, contains some of the same elements and has some of the same and other flaws, proves it. He should have rated Mission Impossible 7 less well than he did, even though it's a better film than Indiana Jones 5, given how similar they are and how flawed he acknowledges that the better Mission Impossible 7 is, after he shit all over Indiana Jones 5 so mercilessly. But he didn't, because he's a political hack pretending to be an honest film reviewer. And that's all I have to say. I'm still waiting to see Doomcock's review, because I'm sure he's going to try to pull the same shit. And I've yet to watch Angry Joe's review of Mission Impossible 7, but once I see both their reviews and see whether or not they pulled the same shit, I'll let you know. For now, I'm going to get out of here. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.